The whole full name.
Donna Levon Bartley Brimacombe.
Gary Lauren Brimacombe.
My mom had a girlfriend whose name was Levon, and that's why I got that for middle name. I don't know anything about my first name.
Okay.
My middle name is my dad's name. And why my first name was Gary, I don't know.
Okay.
Red on the head.
My dad used to call me Pumpkin. In Austin, Minnesota, in my grandma's house. My grandma delivered me.
And when was that?
November 4th, 1934.
Dad?
I was born in St. Olaf Hospital in February 23rd, 1933. My dad lived in Austin because his dad lived in Austin. So while they had worked together at different times, my dad eventually ended up at the railroad. He was a fireman engineer for the Milwaukee Railroad, which is no longer in existence. At the time he died, boy, they went bankrupt. Well, Grandpa Levi was a boilerman. He'd been let's go back to, he worked in the brickyard. And that's where my dad carried hods of clay for the bricks, and Grandpa handled the boilerman for the steam engineer license, and then he was a foreman there. Grandpa got 14 cents an hour and Dad got 8 cents an hour for carrying those heavy hods of clay for the bricks.
My grandma and grandpa lived there. So that's where they settled.
Did you guys know each other growing up?
Mm-hmm.
Off and on, yeah.
Gary lived kind of kitty corner across the street from my grandma and grandpa.
From the cousins and so forth, you know, the Ericksons and the Bests. Grandma was a Best girl, and she had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. And then through marriages of the different sisters and that's where all the cousins came from.
My mother's sister lived in Faribault, and my grandma's brother lived in Wisconsin, and I think that's probably where she came from, around Baraboo, but I really can't say for sure.
Well, since when Dad joined the railroad, why we lived in a bunch of different houses.
And towns.
Yeah, to some extent, but the main thing was that you had rent. Wages weren't much in those days, but basically we always had a 2-bedroom house with a front room kitchen and bathroom naturally.
And you and Carla shared.
Oh yeah. In fact, it isn't until I went into the service why we were still sleeping in the same bed. Well, like my mother's mother was Bartell, and yeah, when we went down there, you had to go out inside in the yard to pump water, and especially in the winter time, you only had a pot-bellied stove in the parlor, and at night you had kerosene.
For heat.
For heat in the bedrooms, that you would have these kerosene, they got a name for them and I can't think of it, but you'd light those at night in the bedrooms. Otherwise, well, your water would freeze up. That was the real farmhouse living then. I mean, water set in a pail on the counter. Every morning you go out there to get that pump warmed up to get water coming through it again, because it had froze up.
A coal furnace.
Yeah. Fact is, I think at one time we had one of the few, you used to get your block of ice for the ice box. And we had, I remember I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when we got our first refrigerator. We were one of the few houses on that block that, boy, the ice man didn't stop at our house.
I don't remember any of the houses that we lived in before Mom went to the hospital. And then we moved in with Grandma. And she had 3 or 4 bedrooms.
Was that a house in town too?
Yeah, that's the one on Grant Street. And there was a little, like a garage type in the back of the lot. And Mom said that when her and Dad were first married, that's where they lived. Was in this one room, but I was too little. I don't remember anything about that other than that's where it was. And then after Mom got out of the hospital, then we went out by, out, I don't know, where it would be south of town, on River Road.
I don't remember that at all.
Okay, well, then we had...
That was when we moved over by Webster.
We had a 2-bedroom house.
Whittier School.
And we had coal for heat and a kerosene stove to cook on.
Oh my.
And that was exciting. And we had a ice box. And we had that until I went into probably about 6th grade. And then we moved into town, but we still had an ice box.
6895.
I don't remember. Fact is, well, no, I'm sure Grandma had one.
It's 4
And
inches.
it was a regular telephone.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't a crank. Well, no, it was a crank one at first. And then she got the
When did
dial.
they put in the part where I can remember Hemlock?
That's after we were married.
Oh, it wasn't.
No, except for the furnace part, and then that you had to, the boys had to keep heat in. Once in a while they'd forget and it would get red hot. Well, kind of like the fireplace.
And you'd have to bank the furnace at night
To keep heat.
before you went to bed, and it would take a while for the new coal to
Kick in.
start cooking, let's put it that way. And you'd forget and leave the damper open. That would let it get air. Actually, the damper would, when you close it, would shut off the amount of air that furnace could get, so it would just moderate heat all night long. But if you forgot, you'd wake up and you'd have to open windows.
So whose job was it to fill up the coal bin? I assume you had it delivered downstairs. It seems like that's
Yeah.
the way they used to do it. Then you had to haul it upstairs.
Well, they knew how much coal they used through the winter time, and so you'd order about a ton and a half of coal twice through the winter time, and that was just brought by
Dump truck.
Wasn't it?
well, it was a dump
With a
truck,
chute,
yeah,
though,
from
kind of like
Wheeler.
a cement chute,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Wheeler Coal Company.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he was, you'd have to start at you'd put boards up along there when they were going to fill it, and then take the top one down, and then that's where you'd start at. You wouldn't start down at the bottom because you'd have all the coal still cold down in that basement, even with the furnace down there. Yeah. And actually, in wintertime, we only had baths once a week because your
Heat water.
well, you had to, even through the summertime, you had to heat that water with a gas heater that was down there. And that's one thing they always didn't want me to do, was not light that heater, because it was just an open
You had
grill
like
in
the
there.
pilot light.
You'd stick that match in there and pow, well, I didn't have hair in my arms then, but we had one wash machine through all those years, that old speed queen tub.
Hand crank or electric or what?
No, it was electric. We did have modern. If you wanted to call it that.
Modern.
No spin dryers and that. I never thought about that. You know, you squeezed them out by. Well, you had a ringer.
No, you had a ringer.
You had the ringer on top,
Mhm.
and everything had to go through there, and then you hung them down there. And
Did you ever get your fingers through the ringer?
Never,
Oh,
no.
my brother did. He got his arm in, Rod. He has, to this day, he has a lump on his arm where
How'd they have it? How'd they get it
went
out?
through. I don't remember that part, but I remember him getting his arm
We'd
stuck
have a
in there.
log. Once it got cold enough that we could keep the side of beef or that on the
Pig.
outside porch we had. That was a windowed in outside porch, and once it got cold enough so that it wouldn't spoil or that way, then and we'd make our own soap and that from all the tallow and so forth that you'd get from the pigs. Well, I don't know. I was about 4 or 5. I can recall standing out in the sun and getting ready for church. I think we were going to church, and I can remember standing out in the bridal wreath on the bushes and so forth. I remember standing out there in the hot sun in that little dark blue suit. I can remember that. I don't know why, but it just was always stuck in my mind. Going to church on Sunday and getting all dressed up for it.
I guess I don't really have any long ago childhood memories. The memory that stands out for me is when I was probably 5, maybe 6. 5, I think it was 5 when she went to the hospital. And I don't remember anything other than her going.
Did they never do a lot of tests on you kids to
Mhm.
see if she had infected you?
We had yearly mantles, yearly. But we never had positive. Dad had a positive mantle. The only thing I remember is Rod was a terrible firebug. Oh, he would, any matches he'd get, he'd go and he tried to start a fire in her cold air register, in Grandma's cold air register one time. That was exciting. Grandma and Grandpa Bartley never had a car. We walked, or I rode my bike. And I had roller skates.
Seeing living on Grant Street, why he was a railroad conductor,
Grandpa Bartley was.
and he could walk to work from there.
Mm-hmm.
Was basically a 3-4 block walk,
Not very far. Not
just
very
up to the
far.
railroad tracks
Yep.
and down the railroad tracks to the.
And if we
yard.
went any place, it was
Yeah,
always on
maybe
the
was
train.
to Go on the railroad down to Chilpy.
That's
That's
where
where
Grandma.
Grandma Bartell lived.
Gary's mother's.
And she only spoke German, and so I didn't understand her at all. I just knew she was. Yet at the time I was 15, and Dad had to go to the hospital in Rochester for the
Spinal fusion.
Spinal fusion on his back. Why, she was sent to take care of us, and we couldn't talk to her. I mean, she never learned American. She never learned English.
Isn't that
No,
something?
Grandma Bartell took care of us for 2 weeks. Mother got a place in a boarding house near the hospital over in Rochester. Grandma Bartell took care of us for 2 weeks. The only thing I can remember was potato soup. Potato soup. Potato soup. She didn't know how to make anything except
Is it any
potato
good?
soup.
He got tired of
Yeah.
potato soup.
But her family had come over from Germany into Missouri, I believe it was, or lower Iowa. And what had been her father had been a doctor. And they had moved moved, I believe, from Missouri up to Iowa. That's what it was, Lower Iowa. And Grandpa Bartels was a blacksmith. And he had married her, and then they had moved up to Joplin, Minnesota. And in those days, people, you didn't have money as it's used today.
No.
You traded. And so he would repair machinery and this kind of stuff and take chickens or hogs or what have you. And when he died, he just left Grandma and, she had two boys, 3 or 4 girls, and nobody paid off their debts. They were just left. They had a small farm that was theirs that ended up, they lost that for taxes, and then she was on welfare with six kids. She'd had hardening of the arteries from all the years of
Eating German food and potato soup.
potato soup. Yeah, she was in that mental
State
state hospital over there, and when she died, they confiscated
The farm.
the at that time she had just a small home in Joplin, and some farmer bought it just for his
That was a pretty hard
house.
guy.
He had only gotten through 8th grade in school, and he'd gotten into a fight with one of the teachers, and the only way she'd let him back to school would be for an apology, and he would not apologize. And that's when he went to the brickyards and worked as a hod carrier. And he was tough. You talk about allowances and that kind of stuff. There was no allowance. He was on the railroad. He was earning a living. He was paying the bills, buying the clothes. As far as asking for money for doing the yard work or stuff like that, that was expected. You did it. That was your board and room. Same way with taking care of the furnace as far as getting the ashes out and that. He was on the road. Somebody had to do it. Ma was doing all the cooking and so forth.
Wasn't she working then?
Huh?
She didn't work then.
No, that wasn't until he had closer work that she got on at the,
Button factory. Didn't
no, it was a overall factory in
Okay.
Austin that they had there then. And then she got on at the laundry. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
McLaren's.
McCarran's Laundry. She worked there for quite a few years, and then she went to the hospital, working various positions there till she ended up in
Central Supply.
Central Supply, sterilizing surgery equipment and that kind of stuff. Dad had come in on a run, and they had been controlled by the government all the years through the wars and that. They were a national defense industry, and so the government controlled the wages. They didn't make wages. It was like slave labor. And so we had, Ma had to work. She took in kids for a while. We had one or two kids all the time, and getting like $5 a week, and she'd send home a pie at the end of the week with the kids for supper and that kind of stuff too. $5 a week.
Lucky people to have pie. She was a good pie maker.
No, that was hard times. I had a newspaper route when I was 10. I'd make about $2 a week unless it was Christmas week, and then somebody here and there would give you a quarter, 50 cents, something like that, you know.
Rich.
Wow. No, Dad said he
Dancing?
had been yeah, they like to dance. Dad had said after he had met her and they got married, he said, I quit drinking and playing cards and that kind of stuff. And he said, I straightened my life out. But he says, up to that time, he says, any time the cops wanted to blame somebody for some
Miss Ian.
prank or misdeed, why, he was always brought in. You know, until I was about 12 and I finally could outrun him. And then he'd just stand there with his fist, you gotta come home.
Well, they didn't have any.
Dad would come in off a run, and he'd maybe been on that engine for 8 to 14 hours. And they'd load up in the car and go out and pick up potatoes out at Hollandale for, well, I think you got 25 cents a bushel for picking. And, you know, a good day you'd do 50, 60 bushel apiece, you know, and so you'd make
That much
extra money for the thing. Because we had some expensive operations for my sister and I. I'd had a mastectomy at one time,
mastoidectomy.
And Carla, she had problems after her
She had
tonsillectomy, and then she had an arm that she...
Osteomyelitis she had in her...
She'd
Can't
fallen
remember if it was
down
left or right.
ice skating, and just the arm just snapped under her. That arm was all full of holes, but just like sponge, they said. You know. So then she had some sort of a rod put in it, and some grafts that helped bring it back. Carla and I never had much to do with each other. Let's put it that way, other than at dish time. Mom made the meal, and she wanted those dishes taken care of. And that was partly the reason I went into the service, was we were still in the same bedroom and so forth, and it was just, every time you turned around, I wish you were dead, I wish you were dead. So I thought, the only way I get away from this is to join the Navy. That's what I ended up doing.
Well, let's see. Grandma was very loving, very caring, and she took good care of us.
And what's her full name?
Ethel, and I don't know what her middle name is. Ethel Simons was her maiden name.
I
And
thought she was a Marsh.
no, not, that's on mother's side. Grandma was a Simon. And like Gary said, Grandpa was on the railroad, so he wasn't home a lot. Grandma did all the building and the repairing of their house. And when my uncle Don took over the house, he couldn't believe how the wiring and the stuff. And tell him about that, how they were getting free electricity.
He found when he went to rewire the garage that she had put the wires on the wrong side of the meter. So all those years
They weren't paying for electricity.
and no meter man ever
Caught it.
caught it.
Wow.
But she added on to the house, and she was a jack of all trades, but made the best homemade bread. Oh, she made such good bread, and she made it really awesome.
She was just, you know, you see these pictures of like the British Queen and this kind of stuff. That was her. She just had a kind of a regalness about her hairdos and everything, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
She was just a very stately person.
Yep, she was.
Now my dad,
Good lady.
having worked at the railroad and that, knew her grandpa and so forth, and he didn't like him.
He was a conductor. My grandpa.
He just thought he was too big for his britches.
And who'd know that we'd end up together in the long run? But no, that was good. It was good. Grandma took good care of us, even though I'm sure it was a big, big load for her to carry. Because now my uncle, he was the youngest, and he was, what did we figure, 4?
4 years older.
Than I was. So Kurt
Yeah.
and
And
John
he's the
thought
uncle.
he was my brother.
Yeah, it's like my dad was the only boy in his crew, but he had 3 sisters. And those 3 sisters were so different from him, it's hard to believe he was part of the same family. Dad was the oldest one. And at times why something went wrong with the girls' lives and this kind of stuff, his sisters, and he ended up being the one to come and drag him home. He went clear out to Chicago for one of the sisters when she
Oh,
married
really?
a band guy
Hard.
and brought her home by the hair pull. But that guy didn't live very long.
Hopscotch. We did a lot of jump roping, and roller skating. Those 3 were the main
Fun.
things. Yeah.
They were good exercise.
You had to have the right shoes though, for the clamps to fit around the soles. But we
It'd be a good stiff leather sole.
We did a
curl
lot of
around the
roller
edge.
skating, and it wasn't that far to the Roosevelt Bridge, which was a bridge that went up and down. So you could go over there and skate up, and then you'd get to free ride down. That worked out good. Oh, and I had a bike. I did a lot of
We
bike
played a
riding.
lot of card games, Monopoly, and cribbage, and aces, and hearts, and just a lot of card games. Buckley Buck. Let's see.
Don't even remember how to
Spades were
play it.
trump, wasn't it?
I don't know. You could play for buttons or
We paid for
Pennies.
nickels.
nickels. Yep. But it was a very cheap game to play.
It took so many tricks. Can't remember just what it was. You take so many tricks,
Been
and
a
that's
while.
you wanted to set.
Been a
You know,
while
you
since we
took
played.
3 tricks, I think it was. I think you dealt about 8 cards to each one. And when you took 3 tricks, boy, then that set everybody that was playing. We usually play at holidays when the families got together. And you make some pretty good money at that, you know. Bingo, I like to go to the different churches and play bingo. Bingo used to be 50 cents. It was.
I don't know.
Make
No, I think it was
good
a
money
dime.
there too.
It was a dime, Gary. And we went to the movies, and that was a dime. 10 cents to get into the movie and have nickel popcorn,
I got two boxes.
nickel candy bars, and nickel
Consider
popcorn.
your bike a toy.
That's what I already talked about that.
Slingshot.
Oh, really? Were you good?
Not bad.
Better than with that little pistol, huh?
Something else you see them draw so fast in the movies. It's probably 8 feet over this way. We'd sit through. We'd go maybe for the 1 o'clock show, I think it was. And it'd be about
1, 3,
2 hours.
5, and 7.
So
You could
maybe
sit
if we
through.
liked the movie, we'd stay over for the second one, or we'd stay through for just the cartoon again.
Yeah.
That was usually it. Taking care of the furnace,
Washing dishes.
doing the lawn in the summertime, trimming the hedge once I got.
That's why you're so good at it. You've got a lot of years of experience,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah.
Well, the garden was Dad's. Dad would put it in, and then, you know, he'd tell me where to weed and one thing or another.
So he
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
be pulling out the wrong stuff.
No, he had, you know, he'd save string from. He used to get your meat in packages, you know, at the local.
With white paper around them and
Yeah,
string around
white
that.
paper,
Yeah.
or kind of a some color on it anyhow. We'd save the string up and put it on a ball, and then when it come plant time, that would mark the rows until, you started having seeds and so forth come up in that. But in the winter time, I'd take the ashes from the furnace out,
Shovel snow.
put them on the dog yard out back for the dog, and shovel snow. I just had all the general work.
What do you mean you put the ashes in the dog yard for the dog?
Well, in the winter time, the dog, we had our garage, and the dog had a house out there, big old insulated one that Dad had made. And we had a barn from the Nicholsons next door, and that made, we only had, there was a fence from the junkyard that was in behind, and then the fence that Dad had put up on the other side.
For it run?
And so we'd take the ashes and we'd spread it on that in the summer, in the winter time, so it would help melt the snow in that. But, when the sun would get in
so
there.
So the dog wouldn't.
And it just, the ashes that were there, there were some cinders in there and that kind of stuff. That would sink in the spring so that it wasn't so muddy back there too.
Oh, didn't know that. Okay. What was your least favorite chore?
Doing the damn dishes.
Oh,
And that's still his least favorite chore.
I was taking care of all that kind of stuff, and then I had to fight with my sister on doing the stupid dishes.
Mostly dishes. I don't remember. No, I don't think so. I just did them because they were supposed to be done. I babysat, and that was my allowance. I got $0.25 an hour for babysitting.
For
And
one?
I was rich. And then I
Babysitting
started,
one child or babysitting an entire
Two.
family?
two girls. And I would babysit, and then I would, depending on when, sometimes I'd have to get the meal, their supper for them. But it was usually sandwiches and soup or something easy.
so
And
were you a saver or a spender?
saver. I was a saver. And then when I got into 10th grade, then I started working at the dentist office after school. Well, not after school. I would just go to classes in the morning, and then I'd go to work from 1 to 5 or whenever we got finished.
Well, I really didn't spend it
Oh, you just
until I
saved
got
it.
married.
So you guys are both savers. Now
When I
that's
got married, I had $640 saved.
And I had this much.
Well, most of it was in Austin.
But what schools?
But I started kindergarten in Webster. Then we moved to Red Wing, and I did first and second grade in Red Wing. Then we came back to Austin during the war years, and so that finished out Austin Elementary and then Austin. I didn't like math, to tell you the truth. I didn't like math. My answer always was a shade
And I
up.
started at Whittier, grade school, and then I went to Shaw for fifth grade, and then went up to the high school for 6th, and then nursing over at Rochester. Yep.
Because I went into the Navy. I went through recruit basic.
No, you started at ACC though.
Yeah, I started for 2 weeks at ACC. But that was nothing more than high school over again. I said, hey, I got to pay for high school again? Forget it. That's when I went into the Navy. And so then I went to basic training, then I went to aviation fundamental school, then I went to aviation machinist mate school, and then I went out to a squadron. My first squadron was a air patrol squadron off the East Coast with lighter than airships. Then I went to an advanced fighter training unit. And each one had some schooling where they had specialists. I was a member of band all the way through. And I belonged to High Y, which was we ushered for the different events at night for class plays and one thing and another. Yeah, we did all that.
I was not in any sports, and I don't recall that I guess I was in Girls Athletic Association for maybe 7th and 8th grade. 9th, probably 9th too. And that was about it, because then I started working, and so I wasn't in any extracurricular activities after that. I liked the fashion, the poodle skirts, and the shoes, saddle shoes. But I was so disappointed in saddle shoes because my feet were so narrow, and they didn't make narrow shoes for saddle shoes, so I had to put extra socks in them so that my feet wouldn't slosh around. But that's mainly all I remember is the poodle skirts, and the shoes were Mom bought me, and the skirts I made.
I ain't haircuts. Never had a mohawk.
I don't recall. Hair was never my priority. I just had hair.
Our school colors were red and white. And, well, you know, Kurt, the awards jackets and that, I had one of them through the years. And it got so dirty in the sleeves because they were white and that. After I had that one, that was enough of the pork pie hats.
The what?
Pork pie.
Never heard of that.
I mean, this big brimmed hat with a
Flat top.
flat top on it. It was maybe 4 inches thick or so. And it just, that was a fad. But I think I bought one up in Twin Cities when I went to the high school
Tournament, huh?
basketball tournaments and that. That was all you ever wore.